All right. Thank you everyone for joining. Yes, Michael, this will recording will be available publicly. Yeah, thank you everyone for joining. Pretty excited about the session today. With us is Homer Gaines, who is an accessibility professional, and we're going to get into sort of the automated versus manual conversation. We love our automation, but definitely there are a lot of things that get missed by automation. So I'm really interested in sort of learning about those and talking about how to approach manual testing when it comes to accessibility. Um, Before we dive in, just a little bit of admin. Please feel free to ask questions as we go along. I would prefer if you could use the Q&A tool here in Zoom to ask questions, but if you just want to drop them in chat, that's totally cool too. We're just gonna have a chat here, so yeah, anytime, please feel free to ask questions. And yeah, I'll hand it off to Homer just to introduce himself.
Good morning, good morning, good morning.
We did lose your video, sorry.
Yeah, I
You're back.
noticed. It just went away. That wasn't good. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining. My name is Homer Gaines, software engineer, designer, and a professional accessibility professional. So we're certified accessibility professional. It's early for me too. So mouth is definitely not working, but looking forward to this conversation as we dig in and talk about, automated testing with accessibility and then also the manual side of things. And so any of the questions that you all have, like you said, feel free to use the questions channel and we'll try to get to them as quickly as possible. I did drop my LinkedIn in the chat for anybody that wants to hit me up there. In any event you have a question, you want to follow up, but it's after everything is gone, feel free just to reach out to me there.
Cool. To kick things off, I'm just going to ask a very foundational question because you hear the term automated accessibility testing a lot, and I feel like it means a lot of different things. So different people, there's linters, and then there's browser add-ons and so on. What does that mean? What does that term mean to you when you say automated accessibility testing?
Automated accessibility testing for me is anytime you are not using a human to actually do the testing itself. And what I mean by that is, yes, we do have to initiate the test if we're using a browser plugin or we're writing the code in whatever IDE you're using and you have a linter. What I'm referring to is when you press the button or when you fire off a process, like say, for instance, you have an accessibility linter as a part of your build process on GitHub. The code that automatically executes against the code that you are writing and provides you back with insight as to the accessibility level support that you have. So that's what I refer to as automated. So yeah, it is a browser plugin. It is the linters in your IDE. It is the checkers that you have during your build process. All of that is automated testing.
Right. Casey asked a question there, which was also going to be my next question. What are your preferred test tools or languages?
My preferred test tools, straight out the gate, I'm using X from Deque and manual testing. That is the other side of this that we really cannot lose track of, because manual testing is really where you're going to find the really detailed, the really personal, the really the best insight as to how users are actually going to use your application, use your product. Right. The automated testing, yeah, that's going to help you catch a lot of the low-hanging fruit, which is great. It also helps you maintain a level of quality as far as code hygiene is concerned. But what automated testing doesn't do is that it doesn't see the relationship between all of the individual parts that go in to building a product. So for instance, you can have a button and you can run X against that button and it's going to check for everything that button should have and let you know. So X straight out the gate, use that. But then manually, I'm using screen readers. I'm using like NVDA is my go-to. I use that on a regular basis, professionally and personally. I love NVDA. There's also JAWS. For those of you who want to use JAWS, NVDA and JAWS are Windows-based. If you're on a Mac, you will use VoiceOver. If you are on an iOS handheld device, again, you'll still use VoiceOver. And if you are on an Android device, you'll use TalkBack. So I use all of those when I am actually testing the accessibility support of whatever app that I'm working on.
Right. Yeah, I feel like that's a definitely a misconception around, you use automation and you can say, yeah, everything's accessible, but then the relationship between elements on the page, that's the hard bit. Like even just like things like, you drop in a bunch of components on a page, is the flow working or not? I find that, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, that flow, that UX pattern, the way someone navigates your application. You could have this pie in the sky idea of the perfect flow to get from point A to point B to complete a task on your product. And a user could come in and completely shatter that whole pattern and find a different route that you didn't think about testing. Now, the automated testing, it will catch how you structured that code.
Hmm.
Do you have the semantics in place? Are you using ARIA attributes where they are valid? Things like that. But understanding how your user actually moves through is critical to understanding and reducing that friction inside of applications.
Right. I I don't know if this is something that's possible sort of top of your head, but can you
Mhm.
can you think of an example where, all the automated tests were passing, but then you run it through a screen reader and it didn't quite work?
Oh yeah. So I do a lot of auditing, both professionally and through freelance work, things like that. Done a lot of auditing over the years, and I have seen UIs where they did not use semantic elements, and that's where automated testing falls short. For instance, we in this space we like to pick on the button. That's because buttons fail a lot. It's because you'll have engineers who will put on clicks on divs. Well, automated testing will see that div and it's like, okay, that's just a div. That's because the automated testing, a lot of times, well, it depends on where it is in your process. If you are running a linter, the linter may catch that if that rule is in there. If you are running browser based checks, then it's looking at the DOM. The on click doesn't render in the DOM. So as it's going through the UI, if you have incorrect semantic elements that are interactive, it won't know what those are. So it'll just ignore them. But manually, when you go to test, you'll realize, oh, this is a button. I should be able to click on it. Okay, I can click on it, but it's actually not showing up as a focusable element. Why is that? I can't use my keyboard on it because it's not focusable. That's where automated testing, kind of falls short and where manual testing really comes in. Because there was one UI I was checking where all of the form elements were images. So yeah,
Interesting.
yeah, every last bit of it was an image. And even they went so far as to even design what the hover states will look like. But the engineers use JavaScript to change the state when the user was interacting with it with a mouse. But all I did is went in and I started hitting the tab key on the keyboard. And when I couldn't get to any of the form elements, that let me know right there, we have semantic issues. So when I started digging into it, yeah, here it is. All these images that just got swapped out and they weren't semantic. So, that is an example of something that will pass a check, an
Hmm.
automated check, but absolutely fail a manual check.
Right, right. So if you sort of dive deeper into that uh, manual testing bit, I'm curious sort of how do you approach it? Do you have a sort of set checklist or types of testing that you do when it comes to manual testing?
Yeah, the first thing that I'd love to hit is the tab key. The tab key is going to tell me a lot about how that product is built.
Right.
And I say tab key because right now I'm focusing on the computer in front of me, right? Whether I'm
Yeah.
on a computer or a laptop. You don't have a tab key, on mobile. There's a different testing method for that. But yeah, I'm hitting the tab key because the tab key is going to tell me whether or not you have focusable elements, how you treat those focusable elements, and what the logical reading order is for the content. So as we look at web content, respective of where you live, you have a direction in which you read, whether it's, top down, left to right, you will follow the logical reading order. And so for me, I am looking for top left, reading down from left to right, going down the page. And as I hit the tab key, if that focusable element doesn't follow that order and it starts to jump around, then I know we have coding issues. I know that we
Right.
have poor focus management, things like that. Once I spot that, that's when I start to go into the inspector and I start to look at the DOM itself and see what's going on. Because I'm an engineer, I know what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the semantic elements that are not being used, or I'm looking to see if there are ARIA attributes placed on elements that shouldn't have them, because that will definitely impact the way a user interacts with the product itself. Then if I have access to the code base, I will actually go and look at the source code and then, relay any information that I need to the engineers who have worked on it, be like, hey, we need to fix this area here, this area here to shore this up. The other thing is too, WebAIM has a color contrast tool. I've been talking about,
Hmm.
the engineering side, but even from a design side, you'll get to the point to where you can look at a UI and tell if there are contrast issues. When
Totally.
you start to see light gray text up against a white background, those are immediate red flags for me. So, I'm sensitive to those. I'm looking at the UI and it's like, does this make sense? Is this perceivable?
Hmm.
Yes, no. And if I'm definitely on the fence, then I go and I definitely check it and be like, let me see what this contrast ratio is.
Right.
And
Yeah,
if
I find the same thing. Definitely built up intuition for that over the years, where
yeah,
especially with the grades, I was like, yeah, this feels lighter. I need to double check if this is going to be accessible or not.
oh yeah. I worked with one engineer on an app, and you could have a UI that like barely passes, because a lot of industries, they'll think, oh, we just have to pass the accessibility conformance, checklist.
Right.
They're just checking a box. That's not how you want to go about it. Being able to check that box and meet level AA compliance is the ground level. That's starting. If you're going into a business, if you're going to work, you don't stop at the front door. You got to go all the way in. You got to go sit down at the desk. If you're going home, you don't stop on the front porch. You go inside. Just meeting the bare minimum is you just stopping at the front door, not going all the way in to do what you need to do. And there are some cases where, yeah, okay, it passes the 4.5 to 1 contrast ratio. But when you honestly look at it, you're like, some users still may have a problem with this. For instance, if you have text that passes the contrast ratio, but the stroke of that font is super thin,
Right.
it's very possible that someone with low vision or even, color deficiencies may still have an issue with perceiving that.
Right.
So you
Right.
want to do better. Let's make this experience good for the user, not just, and we did it, we check the boxes and move on. And contrast is definitely one of those. I was working with this one engineer, and due to situational impairments, which are different than physical impairments or cognitive impairments. This is a situational impairment where he was working on the app and had no idea that there were UI elements in the application the entire time he was there, because his monitor brightness was turned all the way up. And so a lot of
Right.
the
Right.
grays that were used as boundaries for the buttons got washed out. So he never even knew they were there. So one day I was working with him. I was like, "Do you see this border?" He was like, "I have no idea what you're talking about." I said, really? And then I started thinking, I'm like, wait a minute, I have a color corrected monitor because I do design work. He may not. So I asked him, I said, have you ever color calibrated your monitor? And he was like, no. So when we color calibrated his monitor, a whole new UI appeared in front of him. You know,
Yeah,
that gray, technically it passed, but it was still problematic because it got washed out at the highest brightness. So I worked with the designer. We ended up changing that to where even if somebody did have their brightness turned all the way up, you could still perceive the outlines, the borders of the controls that were necessary. So that's how we fixed it. So,
that's fascinating. I've had like when the Retina was newer,
oh
external
gosh, retina.
monitors
Yeah.
wouldn't have that same level of pixel density, right? So you would have like, yeah, it's like the UI would look drastically different on the external monitor versus my MacBook screen.
Yeah, man. Yeah. Oh man, retinas came out. That everybody was hot and heavy about retinas. We got to make sure it works on retina. Everything was 2x. That's how we
Yep.
were
Yep.
exporting everything. We were
Yep.
like, you know what? We're tired of 2x. We're going over to SVGs. That way we don't have to worry about scaling these bad boys up.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
So talking about that the tabbing bit, I'm guessing
Yeah.
like you're like we're going in both directions, tabbing forward, backwards.
Hmm.
Are you also looking for uh like is the text supposed to be focusable in that tab test? Because I find that some applications and some websites tend to have that, especially where like the text ends up being more of an interactive element, but then in content type websites, you wouldn't expect that. So is that like a separate
Exactly.
thing?
Exactly. So that, me personally, no, I don't have interactive text. You have interactive controls. When I see text that's interactive, to me, that means that you have someone who is trying to mimic what screen readers do. Because when you have a screen reader turned on, and depending on the type of navigation that you're using. So, for instance, if you're on a Mac and you're using VoiceOver and you activate quick keys is the arrows that allows you to touch every single node in the DOM, whether it's text or anything like that. And so I see a lot of engineers try to mimic that behavior. But in reality, if you don't have quick keys on, the screen reader will read the content that is there, but only allow you to interact with the controls, buttons, links, drop downs, formulas, inputs, things like that. So you're not necessarily interacting with the text itself. Now you can actually go into those screen readers, like I said, and you can set the controls up so that you can. For instance, if you have cognitive disabilities and it's hard for you to read, you can tab through each word that way or use the arrow keys to go through each word. But natively, just out the box, no, you shouldn't. We shouldn't have interactive text that's not interactive because one, that's confusing. You don't want to land on text that says to activate this text or to activate this element, use control shift or control option shift or anything like that.
Right.
Why are we doing that? So we also don't want to clutter up the UX experience for anyone that is using assistive tech, trying to mimic what assistive tech does.
Right, right. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, I think that brings us to the sort of the bit that I personally find daunting and most developers do, which is screen readers. So
Hmm.
ultimately, I feel like that's you kind of have to run your app or website through a screen reader to get close to what the real experience is. So you mentioned you use NVDA. How do you approach that? And is it something, is that a skill you've built up over time?
Yeah.
Or yeah.
Yeah. Um, didn't always have to use a screen reader, and the first time that I opened up a screen reader, it was cognitive overload. Everything was just coming back at once, and I'm trying to figure out what it was that it was announcing. Also, keep in mind, you know, a lot of the web is not accessible. So
Hmm.
it's noisy in general. So it took me a while to get to the point to where I could effectively use a screen reader to be able to do what I needed to do. A lot of times I was using the screen reader to read through a lot of research documentation, because just over time reading, I started going across, or, through these long research documents. And so the screen reader helped me to stay focused going through, and I didn't have to worry about a lot of noise. Then I started going in and learning the controls, learning how to customize it. So I customized it to my personal use to help me read through these documents easier. But that came with time. It was learning the ins and outs. I first started with JAWS, and in my opinion, JAWS felt more like a bully, in the way that it started up, in the way that I had to manage it and things like that. And then I discovered NVDA. I was like, okay, NVDA is a little less intrusive. I like this. It allows me, when I need it, it's there. When I don't need it, I can send it on its merry way. And then when I got in and started doing the customization, it was like, oh yeah, the customization on this is lovely. So I really like this. I really do like this, because now I have different elements with different color cues depending on where I am inside the application itself. Um, and then even over time, I got used to listening to the content faster. So now when, like for instance, if I'm setting up a new MacBook and I hear voiceover, the speech is too slow for me. I have to speed it
Interesting.
up. Same thing with NVDA. My speech is set up super high because I understand now. I can actually listen to it. I know how to filter out the noise, but that also helps me go in and find where the noise is in the applications that I'm testing, so that I
Hmm.
know how to quiet those down. But yeah, it can be super stressful out the gate. It just takes practice. You know, it's not like you can mess something up. It's not like it's going to delete anything that you're working on. So, you do the wrong key combo or whatnot. Yeah, you do have to learn the key combinations. You have to manage them. You have to memorize them to a certain degree. One thing that I like about voiceover is that you can actually go in and change key combinations to what you like. It wasn't always conducive for me to use, I believe it's the Open Apple 5, I think it's F5, to be able to trigger it, because when Mac
Right.
came out with that weird strip that wouldn't allow you to actually get to F5 easily, I
Right.
couldn't automatic. So I use a combination of I use a Shift Open Apple V to open it and to close it. I do things like that. And on NVDA, it's insert and Q to be able to quit. So gone in, and made my own keyboard shortcuts. But it definitely takes practice. And then over time, you'll start to realize, hey, I understand how to use this, and it's no longer daunting. You know,
Right.
but it does take time.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. The first time you turn it on, it is very overwhelming. And even if you're still new to it, every time it's just you turn it on and making sure you're focused on the right window that you want to test and everything.
Yeah,
It takes a while getting used to it for
yeah,
sure.
it takes a while, just like anything that you're trying to learn, whether it's for professional reasons or out of necessity. If it's foreign to you, it's foreign to you until it's not.
Right.
And the only way to get better at it is to spend the time in there working with it. And I really try to stress that with designers and developers that I work with. Do I tell them that they need to be absolute experts at it? No, but at least understand the basics, understand how elements actually work inside of our applications. How do they natively work? How do you trigger a drop down, so that you can understand how someone is going to actually interact with it if they have a screen reader turned on. What should the native functionality be? What should you expect and go through? That's why that tab key is so important, because people don't think to hit the tab key when they think about navigating something. But
Right.
the simplest way to navigate using a keyboard is that tab key. Hit tab to go forward, use shift tab to go backwards.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Speaking of that tabbing bit,
Yeah.
so Casey has a great question here. Do you find testing libraries reliable to mimic some of that stuff? I have my take on it. So I've been using uh, like
This sounds like that post that just came out yesterday, or at least it was going around yesterday from Nielsen, where they were talking about using human generated twins or something like that to do navigation.
no, I did not see
Oh
that.
gosh, yeah, it's really interesting. All right, so here's my take on this. You are testing a persona. That's basically what we're doing right now. I sent out a post on Blue Sky yesterday around this. We're testing personas. If you use test-driven development, if you're using Selenium, or if you're using Playwright, you can write a test that mimics the user's behavior as a happy path. Thing is, it is not going to veer from that path. It is always going to be there. So as you are writing these automated tests, yes, you can mimic what the human is going to do only in that instance, and that
Right.
instance only. So outside of that, when a human gets there and decides, oh, I want to go this way instead of this happy path that you've provided for me, your test is going to fail. Your test won't catch that. You won't know. So yes, automated testing works for the formula or the patterns that you have already built and are looking for.
Right. Yeah,
Manual
that makes sense.
testing finds out how people actually use the technology.
Yeah, totally. So my take was going to be like I really like testing library, and Storybook testing, which uses testing library under the hood,
Mm-hmm.
has fantastic selectors or interactions to trigger that are from a user's perspective that mimic some of those interactions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But again, they're for very targeted instances to trigger a certain state within a component, and it's just at that component level, but
Mm-hmm.
it's not going to replace the can a user go through the whole flow and are they hitting roadblocks that again, like individually, you're
Yeah.
testing each component and testing their success scenario, but altogether, they might hit a roadblock which you are not considering, or they might not be using the happy path.
Yeah. And testing library is not going to show you that friction point. It's not going to
Exactly.
show
Yeah.
you where someone may run into cognitive overload, because the test will just go through it like, I don't have any problem. Human will get there and read the label and like, this label doesn't make sense.
Right.
So I'm going to make this choice. And by making that choice, they've created an error because, the label wasn't written in a clear manner. Automated testing won't catch that. But yeah, like you said, with the selectors and things like that, like one of my favorite ones to use is visible when I'm writing my tests, because you want to make sure it's one thing to have something render in the DOM,
Hmm.
but it's another thing that it renders in the DOM, but it is also perceivable to the user.
Right.
So if
Right.
you're just checking for it in the DOM, but it's actually not perceivable, your test is going to pass. But if it's something that the user actually needs, case in point, if somebody disables a button, and if you're using the practice where disabled controls don't show up, that's a whole nother conversation that we can spend another 2 hours talking about. But just for this scenario, if you disable something and it doesn't show up in the DOM, your test is going to pass because, or if it doesn't show up visually, but it's in the DOM, it's going to pass. But the user itself won't know that there's something there because it's not actually visible and does not convey that it's disabled. So
Right. Right.
that's why I like is visible.
And you mentioned like we're you're testing for personas. In this case, are you doing about a bit of research upfront around and there's a question on this here from someone like, are you looking for like what the target audience is and, what type of tools I should be testing with? So do I need to invest in testing with both NVDA and VoiceOver, or just focus on Mac users because that's the target audience, or even just sort of like what type of interactions you might be testing for?
I've grown to the point to where I don't test that way anymore. What I mean by that is we look at accessibility, and for those who don't know, they immediately start to focus on individuals with disabilities. But in reality, accessibility is all about the user experience. So early in my career, yes, definitely. I had those personas out there. I was working in e-commerce. We knew who our shopper was. So it was easy to build tests for that. Even though we still did manual testing, it was still easy to go, this is our demographic. Let's make sure that we are aiming for our demographic and then everything else. Again, that was early in my career. Did it work? Yes, it did, because it allowed us to stay focused on what was important to our demographic at that time. Like some of them were medical devices. So we knew that, all right, we probably have someone who is elderly coming here. We want to make sure that, our content is clearly written. We're using nice, big, bold, elements, things that are easy for them to see, because we understand that they may have some type of visual concern, such as presbyoptic or myoptics, or even retinal degeneration, things like that, some type of
Hmm.
low vision. But then as I progressed through my career and worked in different industries, and listening to leadership saying, yes, but what disability should we focus on? And I'm like, you're going about this the wrong way. I'm going about this the wrong way. It's not focusing on that disability. It's just making sure that everyone has access. And the way that I mitigated that was that, say, for instance, I had this one VP who wanted to challenge accessibility. And because in his mind, he was picturing someone with a physical disability. I said, no, you have power users that work for you who complain that they can't use the application just using the keyboard. He was like, well, I don't understand what you mean. I said, do me this: log into your website just using the keyboard. Don't touch the mouse at all. He was barely able to do it. I said, now log into your competitor's website. And so by removing his fixation on what disability do we target, I made it about him. And I said, you are having this problem. You are someone that does not identify as someone with a disability. So if you are having this problem, you have others who fit your model, your mental model of what a user is, also having these issues. And then I pointed to individuals that were in the room who were power users. I said, you have employees here who can't do this.
Right.
Then it started to hit home for him, because he was like, okay. And then I explained, it's like, when you make something accessible, it benefits everybody. It's the curb cut theory.
Right.
A lot of people don't even pay attention when they're transitioning from the sidewalk to the street and back up to the sidewalk. They just, oh, it's a ramp. Cool, I'm going. They don't know that that's there for everyone, but it benefits everyone. The Tenji blocks that are laid out benefit everybody. So when it comes to, like I said, you had mentioned the personas themselves. The personas are what the automated tests are looking at.
Hmm.
But that's a small portion of the overall picture. Yeah, you could have
Right.
someone that fits that persona, but there's so many other characteristics to them that you can't programmatically add in
Yeah.
and get
Totally
right.
agreed. It's also like I find it's a spectrum, right? Like different
Oh
people
yeah.
have different levels of
Oh
needs,
yeah.
and yeah, like
Yeah.
as I get older, I find yeah, like the color contrast is becoming an issue, or text
Uh-huh.
needs to be bigger, right? Yeah, definitely.
That's another thing too. I was giving a talk a couple of years at a conference, and it was met with some resistance. Usually my talks aren't met with a whole lot of resistance, but there were some definite trolls in the audience for this particular one. And I flat out just told him, I said, right now you're building applications for your current ability. What happens tomorrow? when, again, like how you
Hmm.
mentioned eyesight, what happens tomorrow when your eyesight is weaker? What happens if you are carrying groceries and for some odd reason you sprain a finger trying to open up a door while carrying groceries? What then? So you are focused on your current ability and basing everyone's experience on that. When you have to
Right.
think outside of yourself, because everybody and their mom is going to use this in a completely different way. I gave a talk at Access U a couple years ago, and I used a gradient mesh of all the colors and put it together. Because as you mentioned, gradient, a gradient has a start and a finish, right? You either
Hmm.
go from light to dark, 000 FFF. That's a gradient, everything in between. But that is also very linear.
Hmm.
But presenting it as a gradient mesh and representing and stating that each one of us represent a pixel inside of this gradient mesh. Yeah, we may be adjacent in this gradient mesh, but there is still a slight difference between you and I, and how everything comes together and how we actually make this whole picture together. And so we can't just think of you're either blind or you're sighted. No,
Hmm.
you're blind, or you may have low vision and color blindness or something else, or you may be deaf but you have implants, or you may have dyslexia
Hmm.
but you are not as dyslexic as the person next to you. Like one of my best friends, he's dyslexic, he's a camera operator. He's had to deal with that his whole life. He recently found out that he also has dyscalculia, so he also sees numbers in weird configurations. I know people with synesthesia,
Hmm.
where they see a visual stimulus and it takes on a completely different color. I'm like, wait a minute, you're looking at a number. So when you are adding numbers, you are actually multiplying colors. They're like, yeah, huh?
Yeah. 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 Absolutely.
So you just can't focus on this one. But we also have we have the WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Is it perfect? No, it's not perfect. It does have its faults. It does have its shortcomings. And a lot of people want to pick on that. But what you can't miss is that it lays a foundation for building products that will serve everyone. And that's also why you just can't stop at the ground level. That's why that human testing comes in. And when you have folks who are like, all right, we don't have the budget to do human testing. We don't have the manpower. I understand that. That's real. That's real. I get that. There are companies out there like User Testing and Fable where you
Hmm.
can hire individuals to come and test your application. But if you don't have that budget, what do you do? Well, that's when the automated tests come in. But that's also where your education starts as
Right.
well. You just don't, I did the automated test and throw it over. You as an engineer, you as a designer, you as a copywriter, you as a project manager, you as leadership still has to be educated enough to understand how the accessibility works inside of your product to be able to deliver something that actually works. You
Right.
know, that's one reason. Like I use Storybook. I don't know if we actually talked about that, but I use Storybook, and one of the things that I absolutely love about Storybook was that for my engineers who were not savvy when it came to accessibility, when I showed them the accessibility tab in there, you can see the light bulb go off, especially when they realized that they wrote their code correctly.
Right.
Now, mind you, wrote the code correctly. It was semantic. It passed. Groovy. All right, cool. Now let's see how it fits inside the user flow. It's a whole nother thing. But you could see the confidence build. And you also saw a drastic change in their confidence when they were building and writing these features because they learned over time. Did they have my level of expertise? No.
Right.
Screen readers terrify them? Yes. But they still had a level of confidence of, I know what I wrote right now, Homer's not going to get angry with because
Right.
I see that it passed.
So do you have any recommendations to so like that's the initial light bulb moment for developers where they see the automated tests and they're like, okay, this is I was doing something wrong previously, starting to do stuff that's right. But how
Mm-hmm.
do you take them to the next step where they're thinking about the larger page, they're thinking about manual testing, and they might not have someone like you that's dedicated on their
Yeah.
team.
That's when you open up your screen reader. That's where that manual comes in. This is where you start to build empathy. You know, you have you have to exercise that muscle. If you can't understand how someone uses a screen reader if you've never used a screen reader, if you've never used assistive tech, you want to get stressed out, try to control. If this is not a method that you already use, try to control your iPhone or your Android using your voice only.
Hmm.
It's going to stress you out until you actually get used to talking to it. But that's where that comes in. All of us, especially if you are developing on a Mac, you have voiceover. Turn it on, listen to it. That's where you start to go beyond just the basics. It's like, oh, I hear this. And be honest with yourself. That's another thing. Honesty is very important. You can't look at something, go, oh, it's on fire, and ignore it. And when I say that, it's just like, wow, that seems kind of extreme. If something is not right, it is a problem for someone else. So while it may not be a fire for you, it is definitely a raging inferno for someone else. So if you see something that looks like it's a spark, it's a code smell, whatever, dig into it. Well, we have
Hmm.
sprint planning and I got to make sure that I meet this sprint. Yeah. I'm not saying that everything gets fixed immediately. That's another misconception. You find an accessibility issue, we got to stop everything and we got to fix all of these right now. A lot of times you can't because of sprints and timelines. But what you can do is work those bug fixes into your sprints to be able to get them out in a timely manner, you know? And so, yeah, to get to that next level, turn on voiceover. If you're working on Windows, download a screen reader. NVDA, it's open source, it's free. Pull it down. If you're working on a Linux machine, pull down Orca. Orca is a screen reader that we can use on with inside the Linux distros. Just use that. Start to listen to how your UI is announced back to you. Use the keyboard. See what happens if you're hitting the tab key. If you find that you can't navigate any further through your UI or complete a simple task, for instance, if you work for an e-commerce company, if you cannot log in, add to cart, check out through that whole process without using your mouse, you have problems.
Hmm.
That's how you start to level up. And then as you start to find these issues, you will start to research these issues. How do you make these better? And then that's when you start to build your knowledge base that goes way beyond just the basics that's set inside the web content accessibility guidelines.
That's great advice. I feel like treating it just like any other skill,
Yeah,
it's something new. You got to invest the time in learning it.
yeah, you do. There is no silver bullet for this. The solution that you have for this problem over here may not work for this one over here, even though they
Right.
seem related.
Absolutely. I know we're coming close to time, so I wanted to make
Mm-hmm.
sure that we get to answer some of the questions that we have here.
Yeah,
First one's from Michelle. Yes. What's your take on Chrome Walks?
Chrome walks
Yes.
or Vox.
Walks. Yeah, sorry.
Nah.
No.
um, it is not as robust as all the other screen readers that are out there. So yes, Vox is something that you could use if you don't have anything else to use. But there are other tools out there besides Chromebox. So I would recommend using those. It has a lot of shortcomings. So much that it's been a while. It's like it's not one of the tools that I use regularly. There are
Mhm.
times where I will have someone request that it be used. I'm like, all right, cool, bet I'll use it. But no, it's not one that I would openly recommend to use as a day-to-day test.
Right.
Like I said, if you're on Mac, you don't need Chromebox. Use VoiceOver. If you're on PC, go ahead and use NVDA.
Makes sense. Um, got another one here from Casey
Yeah.
about ARIA snapshots in Playwright. I'm not sure if you've played with it, but essentially it's kind of similar to in Chrome when you turn on the accessibility view
Hmm.
in DevTools in the Elements tab.
Yeah.
You get like a snapshot of what the ARIA table is, right? The DOM structure. Um, do you find that as a good replacement to tools like Axe? Or I I I feel like it suffers from the same problem as all other snapshot, like DOM type snapshot testing tools, where it's you're not going to go through that diff and see
Mm.
like what's actually changing. It's very easy to just say, hey, yeah, hit accept and move on. But
Yeah.
also it's not telling you what the issues are. It's giving you at one point you might have said, hey, this is a good snapshot, let me save it. But
That
after
is
that,
exactly it. It's not telling you what's wrong. It's not telling you. You know, snapshots are well, I want to say that they're static, but they're static in a bad way.
right.
Aside from being expensive, snapshots are great when you have a code structure that you don't want to change because you know that it is already sound. But for instance, if I go in and I start just sprinkling ARIA attributes on elements that shouldn't have it, the snapshot is not going to tell me that that shouldn't be there. Snapshot's just going to tell me, you added this. Do you
Hmm.
want this here?
Right.
It's not going to trigger, you should not have this element on. You should not put let's say, you should not put ARIA is expanded on a div.
Right.
You know, that's that has no business being there. You know, or the snapshot is not going to tell you that you put a role equals button on a link on an anchor tag. All
Hmm.
the snapshots are going to be like, hey, I'm here. Did you mean to update this? Yes, I did. Oh, okay, cool. Then I will expect this to be here going, from
Right.
here on out. So
And you
no.
might have an expert on your team who does verify all of those things the first time they save a snapshot, but it's are you
Mm-hmm.
going to have that thorough look on it every single time after?
Exactly. Exactly.
I got another question here from Downey. How
Yeah.
do you deal with false positives from automated tests? Is that something you encounter quite a lot?
Oh yeah. Yeah. False positive, false negatives. Um, one thing that I like to do is I recommend to organizations pick one tool and stick with that throughout the organization. That way, you're all reading from the same book and the same page when it comes to it. Me, I always advocate for Axe, mainly because Axe is built into a lot of the tools that we already use. I've also found that Axe has a cleaner output, so you don't run into all of the false positives and the false negatives that can appear. So when I see those, because of my experience now, when I see those, I know good and well that I'm going to dig into it and be like, let me check this. Like for instance, um, a false negative that will come up is that you can have a image with a solid background color of white, or let's say it's a solid background color of black. The background of your web page is white. The text that goes across that image in a different, say, element is white. Well, some automated tests will not understand that the image that the text is superimposed over is black. It will just see the white text and know that the background is white and therefore fail it. That's when the human comes in and be like, oh no, this actually works because the image is there. Automated test doesn't know that. So that's how you start to handle, those false negatives or false positives. You yourself have to go in and investigate it to make sure that, one, it is not broken. And sometimes, yes, it does require you to use your screen reader, use whatever means you have to perceive the change that is actually there.
Right. Yeah, totally makes sense. Um, so I know there's the W3C guidelines for
Mm-hmm.
accessible patterns. Is there another resource that you recommend for folks?
No, honestly, no. Reason being, all of our laws, both domestic and international, point to that. So if you go anywhere else, from a legal perspective, no, I'm not a lawyer, but I have worked on teams that were dealing with lawsuits because they decided to go rogue with something else and then they had to justify it. Here, the DOJ recommends that you conform to the WCAG 2.1. If you are in Canada, anywhere else, the range is from 2.0 to 2.2, which is the latest and the greatest. European Union just went online with enforcing the European Accessibilities Act. It points to 2.2. So, and 2.2 is the latest version of the WCAG that we have. So you
Hmm.
might as well just aim for that. If someone says, "Oh, I'm going to aim for 3.0," why? 3.0 is not even a thing right now. It doesn't even exist. It's still in draft. It carries no weight legally.
Right.
So no, I just say start with the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.2. Level AA is, because CAG has three different levels to it: A, AA, and AAA.
Right.
If you're doing A, you still got a whole lot of work to do. You do
Right.
AA, ground level, you're right there. AAA, nice, you're starting to think above and beyond. So,
Right.
so
So
yeah,
so there's
no
that
other alternatives.
there's that like the spec part. Like what should I be targeting from a legality perspective and just, the things that folks are looking for. But then there is like day-to-day practice. There are sort of component patterns, and I want to learn as a developer, how do I approach this? So again,
Oh yeah. All right.
Casey followed up with inclusive components dot design. That's something I've used a lot in the past too.
Yeah.
So any recommendations for
Yeah. All
sites
right.
like that?
So that was the legal answer. You want to start here. This is your ground, because there are resources out there that kind of go against that or don't necessarily follow that. But yes, there are other resources online, just as mentioned, just as he mentioned, just as Casey mentioned, that you have inclusivepatterns.com. You also have um, the WAI ARIA patterns that you can follow. There's tons of them out there. I can't just rattle them all right now, but yes, there's plenty of resources out there that you can use. Are they all perfect? No, because humans are writing them. You know, we are not perfect beings. And that's not to say if you go to something that's AI generated, that's going to be perfect, because I have found tons of accessibility issues in AI generated code. So don't don't um, don't mix my words there.
Hmm.
But when you find something, just like if you're dealing with AI generated code, you don't take it at face value. I found this on Reddit. Cool, it's a solution. It works with what I got to do. All right, let me make sure that it actually works. For me, robust is my tiebreaker. And what I mean by that is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines has 4 sections: perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. There are many ways that we can solve problems, but which one is the more robust solution that solves the problem for the widest number of users? So yeah, a div with a tab index of 0 with an on click will receive keyboard focus and will be interactive. Or you can just use the button element.
Right.
That's a simple example. Both of them work, but one is more robust than the other. So that's also where that education comes in there. So you do have to step further when you start to find these potential issues, and you just can't take them at face value. You do have to investigate them, you have to understand them, and then figure out the nuance inside of it, and it takes time.
That's a great place to end, I would say. Thank you so much for joining. This was fantastic. I learned tons.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.